All right, Algebra 1. Hello, this is Mr. Johnson. I would encourage you to watch this entire video and pause when you need to write things down. I will be checking, possibly looking at these notes, so make sure that you are following along, and things should go pretty well. So here we've got a data set of a bunch of students that answered the question, how many times did you wash your hands yesterday? So again, make sure you pause, copy things down as needed. There's a bunch of responses there, and you can see a dot plot of the responses. The big question here is which of the values or possibly value are greatly different from the rest of the data? So greatly different there, meaning like, man, they just really don't fit with everything else. And as I look at this data, it's really clumped up over here, but there's this one value way off to the right. It looks like that is the 19 in this data set. So to me, that would be the one that really doesn't fit. 2 is the smallest, but it's pretty close to 3 and 4 and 5. So it's not really something that doesn't fit, but that 19 is much larger. So we're going to kind of talk about what is that 19 in this data set and, what can we do with that? So 19, a value that is greatly different, right? Greatly different from the rest of the data. This is known as an outlier. And the goal is to figure out, how do we find outliers other than just looking at it and guessing like, oh, that value is really far away, it must be what's called an outlier. There's got to be a way to determine like which numbers definitely are outliers in a data set. And that's what we're going to explore today, kind of a rule for finding outliers. So again, finding outliers is not just a guess, there's a rule to determine it. So let's see what that looks like. So here I have this data set again, and we're going to do what's called a test for outliers. All right, now there's a lot here, and I'm going to kind of talk through it. And if you need to pause and write things down to start here, you can do that. So I've got this same data set again about how many times these students washed their hands yesterday. And there are things known as low outliers and high outliers. Low outliers are numbers that are way smaller than the rest of the data set. High outliers are numbers that are way bigger than the rest of the data set. And how we find these are two, or I guess kind of the same measurement tool, but it looks a little bit different. So to find low outliers, they are all the values less than the Q1 value, which we know how to find, minus 1.5 times the IQR. Remember the interquartile range. We also know how to find that. So we would just take that Q1 value and subtract the product of 1.5 and the IQR. And any number in the data set that is less than that value would be known as a low outlier. And on a box plot, it would look like this guy right here, kind of an asterisk off to the left of the rest of the data. High outliers are values greater than or bigger than our Q3 value plus 1.5 times the IQR. So that 1.5 times the IQR is consistent with both of them. It's either Q1 minus that for low outliers or Q3 plus that for high outliers. So any number bigger than that is a high outlier. So in our data set, we're going to find these values. And see, is 19 really an outlier, or is it just a pretty big number? So the first thing I'm going to do is find the median. And it looks like there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 responses. So I know that the median is going to be that middle response there with 4 on either side. So our median is 4, which means Q1 is going to be between 3 and 4. Q3 is going to be between 6 and 7. And right between 3 and 4 is 3.5. Between 6 and 7 is 6.5. So I found my Q1, I found my Q3. That's the first step. Then we got to find IQR, which I know is the difference of Q3 and Q1. So 6.5 minus 3.5 gives me an IQR of 3. So we're going to use that IQR in this equation to find possible outliers. So we know that low outliers are values less than Q1 minus 1.5 times IQR. So we're going to put those values in there. Q1 we know is 3.5 minus 1.5 times the IQR, which is 3. 1.5 times 3, you can put in your calculator if you need to, but that is going to be 4.5. So low outliers are anything less than 3.5 minus 4.5 or negative 1. So if I have anything less than -1, it would be known as a low outlier in my data set. So if I look up at my data set, the smallest number is 2. That is not less than -1. So I know that I have no low outliers. Okay, so we tested half of them. Now we got to test the other half. Now, we didn't think there was a low outlier, but we thought maybe 19 was a high outlier. So let's see. High outliers are values that are greater than Q3 plus 1.5 times IQR. Well, Q3 plus 1.5 times IQR. We know Q3 is 6.5. We know that 1.5 times IQR is that 4.5, so we can reuse that. So high outliers are anything greater than the sum of 6.5 and 4.5, or 11. So any value in my data set that is greater than 11 would be a high outlier. So I'm going to look at my data set again and see, do I have anything bigger than 11? Absolutely. 19 is greater than 11. So since 19 is greater than 11, it is a high outlier. So I do know that I do have one outlier at 19. So my outliers, nothing on the low side, only 19 on the high side. If I were to make a box plot, which you have done before, and I already made this here with my data set, you can see my median, which was at 4, Q1, which was at 3.5, Q3, which was at 6.5. I've got my minimum here at 2, and typically we extend all the way to our maximum. However, when our maximum or our minimum is an outlier, the whiskers of your box plot only extend to the largest or smallest data point that are not an outlier. So if 19 is my outlier, I'm going to extend my whisker to 7 only, because 19 is going to be marked separately by a circle, sometimes a star. So my max whisker pot is 7 here, because it's only going to extend to the biggest value that isn't an outlier, or the smallest that isn't an outlier. But since I didn't have any values less than -1, my minimum was not an outlier. So this is how to find outliers. The next thing you're going to do is a practice problem, and you can check with the key when you're done before doing the exit slip. Go ahead and rewatch this if you need to, again, pausing and taking down notes however you need. Again, the biggest part is this test for outliers and how to find them.